our PD session today. We're really lucky to have Ants Roberts and Mike Manning from Ravensdown, who we thank for giving up a bit of their time. So I'll just get them to, I think they're going to speak to us for a little while, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for questions at the end. So over to you, Mike and Ants. Thanks.
Sure. So I think the key sort of area of focus is where in terms. Sorry. Yeah. In terms of the environment, specifically in terms of nutrients, what are we doing and what technologies are available to help in that area? So that's the context. Is that sitting right with people?
Yep, that sounds great.
Okay, so the key thing that we focus on, and remember, there's lots of things that one could do. It's a question of what do you focus on. The key area of focus for us at Ravensdown is not surprisingly in the nutrient area. And the key focus within the nutrient area is what technologies and tools can we use, can we develop to tighten up the N losses from the N cycle and P losses from the P cycle. And the consequence of which is, and we would expect, improved water quality and in respect of greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, less nitrous oxide emissions. So if you like, rather narrow by choice, rather deep by choice in nutrients, and a clear focus on tightening up N and P losses from their respective cycles. So does that kind of set the scene a little bit about where we focus and what we do and what our ambitions are?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to add to that?
Well, yes. And in terms of nutrient management on farm, what Mike said is kind of encapsulated in a broad strategy, which is kind of taking hold internationally. And in terms of fertilizer nutrient, it's about placing the right amount of the right nutrient in the right place at the right time and in the right form. And so getting all of that aligned on an individual property is where we focus most of our efforts. And there is, it's a combination of technology, but it's also a combination of management on farm itself. So we call it the 4R principle of nutrient stewardship. And that's what we try and keep in the back of our mind when we're evaluating our services and our recommendations to our shareholders.
Cool.
So probably, Jackie, from here, I'm conscious to make it the most valuable for the participants as possible. Perhaps from here, Jackie, more than happy to take questions. I think the first ones that's just popped up in the message box is the question is, what are those 4 R's?
Okay. So the 4 R's are right place, right time, right rate, and right form of nutrient. Is that sufficient to answer that question? Yeah. So Gemma,
maybe you could. Would you like to expand slightly into how do you tell farmers about the right, about some of those things? Right place, for example. You've got your technology tracking application, that sort of thing. Would you like to run through a few of those? Stop passing the buck, you two.
Yeah,
that's fine. So in terms of the right rate, the way we go about determining that is what we call good diagnostic information, typically soil test information, typically plant or pasture analysis information. So good diagnostic information relative to the farmer's expectations. So and then we use models. For example, what we call the overseer model. So what's the farm system and what losses occur as a consequence of that farming system? So we use the models, we use good diagnostic information, and that helps inform the right rate. Yep.
And that process, the diagnostic information, the turning that information into a recommendation is backed by 50 or 60 years of robust scientific research that's been done by universities, CRIs, etc. in New Zealand. So, we don't just pluck a number out of the air. It's backed by good trial work that's been done on New Zealand soils under New Zealand farming conditions. And we only use that robust information to back up the recommendations based from the diagnostics.
Yeah. So in terms of the right place, we've done a little bit on the right place. If you think about a hill country farm, for example, you'll immediately recognise there's variability. Some areas, by virtue of aspect and slope, produce less dry matter than other areas. And so what we do is we match the placement of fertiliser relative to what that unit can produce. So we have an aspiration to avoid a blanket application. We have an aspiration to be precise, putting the fertiliser where it's most able to work. So that's a little bit about the place. Now the form, again, depends on whether there's a rapid response required or a maintenance response required. And that often informs the choice about form and whether there's any immediate environmental sensitivities. So that's often a little bit about form. And timing, well, that often is a consequence of the farmer's decision around timing. There'll be times in the year when it's more environmentally sensitive, for example, wintertime than others. So those aspects come with the timing as well. So that's a sort of an overview, and I hope that helps. Now,
sorry, could I just add to that? So in terms of, we're talking about despite popular belief, we're talking about all nutrients. So that's the major nutrients: P, K, S, calcium, magnesium is required. So it's about, because not every farm requires all nutrients at the same rate, obviously. Those are the major nutrients, but we also are concerned about the essential trace elements that are either essential for plant growth or for animal performance. So we're talking about the whole spectrum. In terms of the right form, quite a bit of our R&D work is related, as Mike said, to trying to reduce N and P losses. So some of the forms of fertiliser that we're working with, we're working to add coatings or additions to those fertiliser products to tighten up the N and P cycles on farm. So the form is sometimes amended to reduce the risk of direct nutrient loss from fertiliser. But in terms of the N and P losses from particularly pastoral farms, but also arable properties as well, those losses, the biggest proportion of losses, provided you're following the 4R principles that we just talked about, the greatest proportion, 80 to 90% of the N and P losses come from a farm system, not directly from the fertiliser. In other words, you place the fertiliser on the ground, and if it's done in the right place, the right time, etc., very little will be lost directly from the fertiliser to the environment. It's lost indirectly because soil is lost from farms or nitrate is leached through soils. So.
Okay, thank you. I guess I just have a question to ask about the right form. Now that you've got the technology to coat products so that you're losing less through, to the environment in terms of volatilisation and that, do you see in your future that you'll be moving to supplying only those coated protected forms and moving away from, say, raw urea? Is that something you've been thinking about?
Yeah, we have been thinking about that. I expect that the farmers will make their purchase decisions more along those lines than not. So, for example, approximately half of the urea purchased by Ravensdown shareholders now is coated in a relatively short time. And I think that will progress till almost all or most of it will be coated. It's a sensible thing to do. It's a relatively easy technology, reduces losses. So yes, I do see that continuing to happen. And in the future, I don't know what they'll be. There'll be other types of coats to the current one, and that'll be part of the future. But yes, more coatings than less into the future, Jackie. Yeah.
And have you, have you been steering farmers that way by price differential or anything like that?
So
or sending other signals to farmers, or just, I know you've been advertising and telling them, there's been the whole education piece, just wondering if you've done other things to encourage them down that way in a faster manner.
Yeah, look, we do. So we point out, for example, the reduction in nitrous oxide as a consequence of using coated urea as opposed to uncoated urea. So there's several things we remind them of. One is less direct loss of the atmosphere, which they don't much want, and we don't if we can avoid it. And if we avoid the direct losses, there's a subsequent benefit from less nitrous oxide losses. So we just remind them that that's good farming practice. The coating itself is more costly than straight urea. That's not contested. People understand that, but it's relatively neutral in terms of cost. Cost you more for the product. You can use less because there's less losses. The net effect is similar. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
I see there's a question here. I think, how does Ravensdown create more revenue for R&D from a potential decline on revenue from fertiliser nutrient sales? Good question, and thank you for the question. I think the key one is that the board of Ravensdown, who sit in this room we're at the moment, would say if there's less demand for fertiliser as a consequence of all the technologies, then first and foremost, we will right-size our business for less fertiliser. So we're not particularly concerned about that if we have to right-size it. If we have technology like the coating I mentioned, then the proper thing is that the cost of that coating is charged for, so that it's very clear what the value proposition is for the farmer. So probably the long and short of it is, if there's less nutrients demanded into the future, and I suspect that's certainly the case for nitrogen, the key thing is to right-size your business accordingly in the first instance. I see there's another. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to read that question out, but you go. You can obviously see it. So.
Yeah. Okay. So the question here on the topic of managing a time of change, managing in a time of change, do Ravensdown have strategies, goals for ethical, sustainable sourcing of fertiliser, and also for emissions reduction at fertiliser manufacturing facilities? Again, really good questions. So what we do with all of our suppliers is we have a very rigorous assessment in terms of the suppliers. So that covers things like infrastructure, reliability. It covers ethical things like level of fraud or otherwise in that country, political stability, making sure they've got appropriate labour practices. So there's a matrix of things that we consider, and we require the supplier to actively populate these assessments so that we can be sure to the Ravensdown board and to the Ravensdown shareholders that we have a process for making sure our suppliers are very ethical. So that's been in place for quite some time and stays in place. So it's an important component about choice of suppliers, and we rank suppliers in terms of the preferred one through. So that's how we do that. In terms of our manufacturing sites, for example, at Christchurch, where we are today, we need and we secure a consent to operate. And there are consent conditions pertaining to that issued consent. And they cover a range of things. They'll be covering dust, they'll be covering SO2 emissions, they might be covering noise and all sorts. So that consent's issued for a period of time, and then you apply for a renewed consent. And often what we see over time is with newer consents, the consent conditions tighten in the light of community expectations or technology. So there's a very robust process in with regional councils, district councils for consent process. Consent conditions are issued, monitored against the consent conditions, and then in some point in the future, a new consent is required. So, Gemma, I hope, does that answer it for you? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Gemma. what are your another question, what are your strategies around the growth of regen ag and how this will affect your business? Yep, again, really good question and a topical one. So look, as we talk with our board, we're agnostic, really. So we have some people who, and that's entirely legitimate, who say, I'm biodynamic farming, and that's me. I go, yep, that's cool. We have other people who say they're biological farmers, and I go, sure. We have other people who say they are organic farmers, and that's fine. We have some people who say they're regenerative farming, and that's okay. And other people say we are new generation farmers, and that's okay. We have other people who say they're conventional, and that's okay. So what we say is, if people look to us or look elsewhere as to which system they may look at, then we say the best way to help there is to have really good, robust science to guide the decision. And that's science that at a farm system level, that may take 7 or 8 years to be really robust. But the key thing from our point of view, agnostic as to what the shareholders, how they want to farm, that's not our role. Once they've decided, we will help them the best way we can. And if they're looking to make a choice, the best way we can help them, as others can, is to access good, robust science to make the decisions. So that's like in a nutshell. Is there anything else you want to add, Ence? That's in a nutshell.
This is dangerous ground. There's a lot I'd like to add, but what I will say is that in terms of the specific question and the regenerative agriculture movement, if you like, they have an avowed antithesis to using conventional fertilizer products. So therefore, there's very little we can offer that those people who say they are going to follow the regenerative agricultural movement. But what just to add to Mike, I mean, none of those systems that he sort of named are perfect in everything they do. And if nothing else, the discussion around regenerative agriculture, if that helps us move agriculture in New Zealand, whatever label you apply to it, forward in terms of reducing emissions, both gaseous emissions, greenhouse gases, nutrient emissions from farm systems, then that's got to be great. However, again, as Mike says, the codicil is it has to be robust science, proven technologies, systems, management actions that do that, rather than what people wish for. In other words, an ideal world which may actually not exist. So we're happy that that movement is there. I am not a advocate of regenerative agriculture because I believe that a lot of the actions we use on New Zealand pastoral farms in particular already fits into that whole movement, if you like.
Cool. Thank you.
So the next question, is there someone from Ravensdown as a point of contact for the work being done in Sustainable Vegetable Systems project? This includes improving overseer modelling for vegetables and developing nitrate management tools for growers. Happy to receive an email follow-up. Yeah, look, sure. So if you would email either myself or Ance Roberts on that, very happy to progress that offline, sure.
Having said that, we don't have a lot to do with that particular project.
No, but it's not to say we couldn't.
No, that's correct.
Couldn't have some involvement. So, yeah, probably for the sake of the audience, we'll, I think it's Jim, we'll pick that up by email afterwards.
I was going to tap out a question, but since I can talk, I might just ask you. I was just going to say, how much do you expect the 190 kilogram cap of N to affect your business? Now, do you have a feel for what percentage of your dairy clients are going to be affected by that rule or the cap?
Yeah, we do, Jack. So if you look across New Zealand, the majority of farmers are at or below the 190 cap. Yeah. The geographical area of exception would be Canterbury, where many or most are above the 190 cap. So if we're working with shareholders in Taranaki or Hawke's Bay or Waikato, wherever, most of them are already under the cap. So Canterbury, particularly those under irrigation, a good number that are above the cap, and already we've started engaging with them, and already they have started reducing down by way of a stage management down to 190. But Canterbury will be the area of most work, and it comes into effect 1 July this year. We have started work, but there's more to be done. So mostly in good shape, apart from Canterbury, where it'll require a bit more work.
And when you say you're doing a stage reduction, they don't have much time, do you? It's going to be a bit like falling off a cliff. Is there any ability for those farmers to get a bit more time to manage their way down through it, or is it going to be a sharp shock?
I think it'll be a bit of a sharp shock, Jackie. We didn't set the rules. We thought it was a rather blunt instrument. Anyway, that's behind us now. The rule starts 1 July, and I don't think there's much latitude to move on that from the Crown, but that's for them to make that call. So, for example, if somebody was using 240 kilograms of N historically, and I can think of several already just in my mind, that this year we're in, they have already gone from 240 to maybe 220, and then the year starting 1 July from 220 to 190. So some progression already is what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been working one-on-one with some of the Canterbury farmers, and they picked up on this relatively quickly, and they are moving as fast as they can. Obviously, for some of them, they've developed a whole system around requiring that the higher rates of nitrogen above 190 to feed their livestock. So there's animal welfare issues in terms of pulling back straight away. They have a variety of levers they can pull on farm and off farm to help them get close. They won't all, the ones that are out at 300, 350, which are the smaller number, but there are people out there of kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, that they will find it harder to get straight to the 190. Obviously, that's where the staging comes in. But I'm confident that the bigger majority will get there by the end of this of the new dairy season, which starts 1 July.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I see, Jackie, there's another question here. What impact will changing land use, including a general halt to dairy conversions, have on land use intensity across New Zealand and the range of products you offer, say, in the next 10 to 15 years? It will impact. It's probably more on the quantum of products required rather than the type of products. That said, we are seeing, as we've talked about earlier, moving from straight urea to coated urea, and it may be other products are coated into the future. But I think the core product like superphosphate, urea, ammonium sulfate, potash, DAP and things will likely remain in 10 or 15 years. It may be they're coated with some sort of active that reduces losses. So probably the volume will be affected. The types of products, the core products will be the same, but they may well be coated with things that we haven't thought of yet to help reduce losses.
The de-intensification, if it happens, and it may well do for a variety of reasons, will affect, as Mike says, mostly the nitrogen tonnages that are sold in New Zealand. It's only been 30 years since we had very little nitrogen fertilizer used on pastoral farms. It was used on arable farms and vegetable farms, obviously, and that will continue because grains and vegetables are going to be important to New Zealand, but also export. So it's mostly in the area of nitrogen. The other phosphorus, sulfur, lime requirements, trace elements will all be there still, particularly if that de-intensification moves us closer in some places, and it's already there in most places, but in some places it moves us closer to a grass, legume, pasture base, which we started off with back in the 60s and 70s. I might remind you. Yeah.
And Eds, do you have a feel for, just following up on that question, do you have a feel for how much of that, say, de-intensification could be taken up through more nitrogen efficiency of use, or is it actually will there be a relationship with how much less pasture's growing? Like, do you think there's much room in there for farmers to just use it more efficiently and still be growing that amount of pasture?
Well, yeah, I can quote you a specific example, and that's basically the Lincoln University dairy farm, which, you know, developed systems and they got up to somewhere in the order of about 300 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare that they were using, and growing 18, 19 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, and producing 1,700 kilograms of milk solids. I might not have those figures exactly right, but they're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And they made the decision to not use that rate of nitrogen fertilizer. They could read they read the tea leaves and saw what was coming, and they decided to drop their rate basically in half, almost from 1 year to the next. There was over 2 seasons, but basically a very quick transition from 300 down to 150. They're currently running about 170 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare and still producing the same amount of pasture and the same amount of milk solids. Now, they made some other adjustments as well, and they had a lot of advice and support from from experts, etc. But still, that they showed that you can grow the same amount of pasture, produce the same amount of milk with less nitrogen, and so therefore they've very, very definitely increased the nitrogen use efficiency of their fertilizer and that's possible. That's possible on a lot of farms, I believe.
So that's the way forward, to replicate that sort of increasing efficiency, dropping the use.
Yep, I think so. That we would encourage that. We think that's very, very sensible and prudent to do so.
Yes.
And they showed it can be done. It wasn't easy, but it's not a reason for not doing it. It's just a reason for just taking some time to get it right.
Yeah. So how much of the support, like the wraparound support you said they had, how much of that kind of support are your technical team going to be able to help farmers out with, or is that going to have to be picked up by other farm advisors, and is that like a mandate for your technical team to actually reduce the amount of fertilizer when they're selling it? Is that going to be a bit of a tension?
It will be. So the mandate is to put on the right amount of fertilizer, and that if that means less, that's just fine with us. So there's no tension there. In terms of a change to the system, that's a bigger question. We help in that, but it's difficult for us to do that alone. So often farm management consultants can play an important role there, because often it's the way that you undertake your grazing, pre and post grazing residuals. It might be the number and type of cows in terms of BW and a range of other things. So it's a farm system. We play a part in that, but consultants play a very big role there as well.
Yeah, so you might have caught that I mentioned there's a number of levers that farmers can use to help them get to that 190, and some of them are around nitrogen fertilizer rates and timing and use, etc. But then it escalates to so that those are, if you like, from our perspective, the low-hanging fruit and well within our area of expertise, and then it starts to balloon out to tweaks to grazing management, etc., which obviously, because we're not on farm every day or every month or whatever, we can't help farm. We can talk about the principles, but the detail would need a farm consultant, etc. And then the final levers are the big ones. Well, how do I if I can't meet the 190 with my current system, I might have to make some bigger changes, which have quite significant business effects on my business. Stocking rates, and all those sort of things, which is not in our edges. But we have prepared a 2-page kind of handout that all our reps have, which they can give to farmers, listing those levers and going from the low-hanging fruit to the system change type things for them to consider. So we try to create awareness so that they can go to the right people for the right help. And we picked up some of those levers from Dairy New Zealand and other organisations. So I
guess that's the start of the whole step change program, isn't it, really? Those sort of decisions.
Correct.
Oh, thank you very much. I feel like I've dominated the questions a wee bit, but I'm just wondering if there's any other questions that people might have. And is there anything else that you guys would like to add? We don't want to hold you up for too long.
Oh, no, we're not holding us up.
No.
There's some big challenges ahead. I mean, that's like stating the obvious, but that occupies our mind. Challenges around greenhouse gas reductions, and methane's going to be difficult. Not our area methane so much, enteric methane, more sort of around nitrous oxide. Water quality in terms of N and P. There's also the issue of bugs and sediment, sort of nutrients and water quality is our domain. So challenges ahead. We're not sort of daunted by that, but we're conscious that it's going to take a lot of effort by a lot of people to help in this process. But we've all got to do our bit to get there, and I think that's possible, but it will be a joint effort required is kind of the big thing that I think.
And I would just like to say that from from my perspective, from our perspective, that we will challenge ourselves. Any claims, any perceptions, any views that are put across that are counter to what we understand to be well-proven scientific principles. As a scientist, I almost have to have a lie down and a couple of Panadol every day when I read the popular press, etc. Because I have to calm myself down and take my heart pills because it upsets me. It upsets me that we're getting. And one of my old bosses and still friend and colleague is Dr. Edmeades, and I'm sure you're all aware who he is. And he talks about post-normal science, and that's what we're met with every day is the reinterpretation or the misinterpretation of good, robust science. And so I make no apology for making sure that this company pushes the conventional, robust science to support what we do. And our farmers do.
Cool. Great. Oh, well, look, thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting, and we've had some good questions. And thanks for letting us put it up on YouTube too. I'm sure some more of our members will pop along and have a listen. So thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Very happy to do that. And if you'd like to, at some future occasion, very happy to engage again on this basis. So thank you as well.
Yeah. Okay. As you say, it's quite a fast-moving space, so I think a catch up in a little while might be really good. Thanks a lot.
Indeed. Great.